All right, there we are. Hello, welcome. This is going to be lecture one for the Asian politics class. Apologies for all of the mess. Be sure to check your simple syllabus for the new readings because they pulled the old book off the internet. But the intro of that first chapter was pretty good, so we'll talk about that, and then we'll dive into China for the chapters that I assigned. Okay, so chapter one in the original book, Explaining Change and Continuity in East Asia. We'll go through the intro and basically says, the timeline really begins around World War II in 1945. And we'll talk about some of these things that he's discussing across the different, we got Korea and China and Japan. So, and then we'll move on to India because India is a major part of sort of the Asian subcontinent, right? Okay. For the most part, what we see post World War II is like the opposite of Africa, South America, etc. We see absolute explosion of political changes and especially economic changes when you're talking about South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, China, um, even states like Myanmar. Well, Myanmar's a bit of a mess, but like Taiwan, not Taiwan, but like Thailand and Vietnam, etc. And much of this is due in immense ways to a different approach from what many African and South American nations took. In Africa and South America, they took what was called an import substitution industrialization philosophy of economics. And it's called ISI, import substitution industrialization. And the idea was that they would basically put up protectionist borders, tariffs, and things like that. They would use the national economy and tax resources to bolster particular industries in the hopes that they could create an internal market economy where they could sell, mid-level to high-level goods. The theory said that they would be able to keep up with the sort of export economies, but it was a complete disaster, right? And as the 70s and 80s approached in South America and in Africa, you had massive problems with currencies, with the amount of debt that they had incurred, and none of their industries could keep up, right? There are no real Brazilian cars on the world market. There are no Venezuelan refrigerators on the market. Like these policies failed completely. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have what's called export oriented industrialization, EOI. And this is what most of Asia and especially East Asia sort of implemented in their economies, discounting, of course, North Korea. But in South Korea, Japan, China, Vietnam, a lot of these nation states, what they did was they decided we want to be able to compete on the world market, right? So we're going to build sort of first level and intermediate level products. So we're talking about, refining metals and metal, steel factories and refrigerator and microwave factories. And then eventually they moved into things like TVs and televisions. And one of the reasons for this was because of the vast amounts of money that they were pouring into their educational system. But it was also because they were competing on the world market, they had to be efficient and productive, right? And this allowed them to come up with their own sort of technological innovations. And now you have some of the world's most extraordinary companies popping up in Asia, especially in Korea and Japan, right? So we have Hyundai, you've got Toyota, you've got the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, which I'm invested in, and it's done huge things. Um, they're basically running the world's semiconductors, especially for AI, because they sort of stumbled upon what was called a graphics processing unit in the early 2000s for video gaming. They used to be a video gaming company, and the AI companies discovered that their video game chips, these GPUs rather than CPUs, were far more efficient when it came to running AI algorithms. And so TSMC, the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, is like the absolute forefront right now of chips. Whereas a lot of like Meta and other companies are struggling to make chips that are as efficient and useful as theirs. So interesting company to watch. But again, they've moved into sort of the very high level manufacturing, high level intellectual properties, things like that. Um, We've also seen a massive shift toward democracy in South Korea and Japan, especially, and arguably in Taiwan, Hong Kong, others. China, of course, North Korea do not fit this model. And then there are other countries like Indonesia, the Philippines that are sort of middling concerning, when it comes to their democratic scores. But South Korea has been since at least around the 1970s when they banished the military autocracy. South Korea has been a very strong democracy, and even this week, actually, they arrested their former president for trying to declare martial law. Martial law only lasted about um, 6 hours, from what people can say, journalists, etc. It lasted about 6 hours. He was immediately forced to sort of hide in his sort of fortress home. He had a personal militia with him, and they tried multiple times to arrest him. Eventually, this week, they finally did arrest him, and he will be brought to trial for basically crimes against their democracy um, I guess, manipulate an emergency by declaring martial law. And then you have Japan, which is another very, very strong democracy. They've got some problems. They had what was called the Lost Generation in the 1980s and 1990s, where they were having severe currency issues and some really bad issues with their institutions, with being sort of ossified around only hiring men. People do not change jobs in their lifetime. They had to sort of get rid of some of these traditions to be able to keep up with the modern marketplace. But Japan is kicking pretty much butt these days. They're in the top 10 economies in the world. They have really excellent manufacturing and factories, etc. Um, on the other hand, China and North Korea have some problems, right? China was a booming economy up until about 2020. COVID hit, and we had, what I like to call the Great Supply Line shift, um, where Western democracies have begun to become much more skeptical of China since they've instituted their sort of one belt, one road OBOR policy, where they're trying to rebuild two Silk Road routes, basically one over land through the stands, right? Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, etc., to get to Europe, over land by rail. But they also want to build sort of a sea route, right, through the South Pacific, through the Indian Ocean. They've been building like military bases and assets all the way around India, which is very concerning, all the way up to Western Africa or Eastern Africa near the Suez Canal, because they're looking for, rare earth minerals, but they're also pushing out extraordinary funds to fund some of these super projects. But the problem is COVID hit, and already skepticism was building, right? You saw Trump administration's first term response to China was really sort of hardcore. Um, America has been turning this way toward Russia and China being our greatest enemies. Um, and so once COVID hit and we saw all of our supply lines sort of grind to a halt, right? And we discovered that many of the sort of easy to middling products that are manufactured in China, like clothing or like nursing outfits or like protective equipment, the face masks or whatever. All of these sorts of things were in China and only China for the most part. And it became very troublesome for not only our national security, but for our economic security and our supply line security, which has strategic interests as well. And we saw inflation rise through the roof, partly because of that, and partly because of Russia's attack in Ukraine. Um, but since then, since 2019 or 2020, America has moved quickly and strategically away from China as an economic partner. And we've moved a lot of our purchases towards sort of China's border countries, which has its own issues because they're getting the products from China, right? But it is causing problems for China. So we're picking up, you know, products from Cambodia, um, Thailand, Vietnam, etc., which are boosting their middling factories, which is doing well for their economies. So um, China has been struggling. Their housing market basically collapsed over the last 2 years. They are in pretty severe debt. And a lot of Western countries are moving their supply lines away from them. So it'll be very interesting to see what Xi does in the near future to deal with that. All right, enough of that. North Korea, we know, is run by a fanatic weirdo, Kim Jong Un. He comes from Kim Il Sung and then I can't remember all the Kims. Anyway, it's the Kim dynasty. He's basically like not only a dictator in sort of the military fascist sense, but also sort of a celebrity and also quote unquote a god, right? And so it's a really weird mix there in North Korea. They're one of the most isolated countries on earth. China helps to keep them propped up, but even China has some frustrations with North Korea, especially with a lot of their military testing and their sort of bombastic and antagonistic approach to foreign affairs. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the future too. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. I think that's a really great start for just introducing the area. And then we'll move to China chapter. What is the? I've just picked out a handful of chapters. Okay, chapter 3, the revolution. And then we have chapter 5, China post Mao, and then we have sort of contemporaneous China and their issues. All right, thank you so much for being here. Have a great day.